You're not having a ton of penalties. Like, you're scoring at a high rate, man.
I will disagree with you on the rest of your list, though, because I think Notre Dame's number 2. Because
I think so too. Probably.
I thought
It's just tough.
they didn't stand a chance physically against Georgia because of the size disadvantage, and they owned them for 4 quarters last night. And that's still a good Georgia team. So if they can do that, if they can keep every game low scoring and they can run the football, they can be competitive against anyone. I do have a little concern about their inability to throw the ball, because they get down 14 or 17 points. They're not a team that can really claw the way back, so that does give me a little bit of pause. Penn State, very good team. They have gotten a lot better at throwing the ball this year, which is a plus. I'd probably put them at number 3, very good on defense as well. Texas, as talented as they are, they have not played their best football really in the last month of the season, rolling over into now. Again, they got outplayed by Arizona State on Wednesday in the Peach Bowl, and they found a way to win because things kind of went their way. Probably should have been a targeting call at the end of regulation that didn't end up getting called, and were able to find a way to win in overtime. But they didn't play the best football. Didn't play the best football against Georgia. They played fine against A&M and fine against Arkansas and won those games, but it wasn't the dominant performance that we expected out of those teams. They've not played up to the standard of what we thought this Texas team should have for a lot of this season.
No, definitely. And we'll see what happens. I do think Texas is probably, look, they'll have the home field advantage essentially since it's at the Cotton Bowl and whatnot. But I think, Ohio State fans travel really well. And I think Ohio State is really, I just don't see them losing, at least in the Cotton Bowl. Like, I think Texas is in for a rough game potentially, but I think the other one, Penn State, Notre Dame, that's going to be a really, really fascinating matchup that really could go either way. And also, it wouldn't shock me to see Notre Dame in the national championship game. They are playing that well right now. As long as they play like they have been, defense, running the ball like they have been, it's going to be hard to beat them.
We'll have plenty of time to preview these games before they happen next week, but I'm taking the under for Notre Dame and Penn State because I think this is a low-scoring slog of a game.
I agree.
It's just all about defense and running the football because both teams are really good at that. And then, honestly, I think Ohio State blows out Texas. I think Ohio State, once again, just jumps on them, and it's 24-0, with 10 minutes to go in the second quarter, and Texas doesn't have any answers.
No, I agree. I think that's what we're in for in Texas. I think the fact they haven't played anyone really that great this year, yes, they played Georgia, but they've gotten beat twice. They haven't beaten anyone significant this year. I just think that is going to catch up to them at some point, and Ohio State is a juggernaut right now.
Yeah, and I know Ryan Day wouldn't admit it, and he didn't admit so after the game either, but it really seems like losing to Michigan got them refocused. And you never want to lose games, obviously, but sometimes you got to look yourself in the mirror and have a dose of reality. And it seems like that's what Ohio State got because they've, again, been playing almost flawlessly since then.
That's going to look real good on the documentary whenever that comes out.
Oh, I'm sure it will. No doubt about it. And for the SEC this year, Texas still live. Again, I don't have the highest confidence in them, but we've lauded how tough the SEC is and haven't looked like it as of late.
It always seems like come bowl time, the SEC just has some of these rough losses and whatnot. And look, Ole Miss blowing out Duke last night. Congrats! That's great and all, but
Duke was missing their quarterback. They were missing a lot, and nobody thought they were going to match up with the Ole Miss.
No,
let's be honest.
No, let's be real. But yeah, and some of these other games, the SEC, like South Carolina and Bama. It would be a lot different if those teams won, but unfortunately, that's not the case. So yeah, the SEC is kind of getting a little.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Veltri along with you on your Friday here on The Game. Obviously, our primary focus has been on football here as of late, but as we've turned the calendar over to the new year, that means it is time for SEC play to start in basketball in general. Women's team played last night, picking up a pretty easy victory, 83-52 over Missouri. And the men's team heading on the road tomorrow, take on a Mississippi State 2 o'clock tip. Pregame coverage will start here on The Game at 1:30. And Jack, it's going to begin what is a murderer's row of a conference slate for South Carolina in what is probably the best and toughest year the SEC has ever seen.
Yeah, this is where we're going to learn everything we need to know about this team. We might learn everything we need to know within the first 3 games of the year, because guess what? You go to Starkville this weekend. Mississippi State is a very, very good team. I know South Carolina, I think they won. No, yeah, they beat Mississippi State twice last season.
They ended the regular season with the overtime win.
Yeah, and they beat them in the first SEC game of the year, I believe. But this is a very good team. Chris Jans has done a great job with that team, and they're top 25 in the country right now for a reason. And then you get Alabama and Auburn. Like, by then, you very well could be 0-3 in conference play. It would not shock me. But look, this team, they've got issues. But the good news is they have been able to persevere and win a lot of these games. The problem is they tend to fall behind at halftime. If you fall behind at halftime against an SEC team, I wonder if you're digging yourself too much of a hole to come back.
Let's hear from Coach Paris last night in Carolina Calls, cut number 9 here, Dave, on talking about having the toughest remaining schedule in all the nation.
It was as I looked at the schedule. This is before anyone was ranked and before
Right.
one game was played. I had some, you know, I don't know, I wouldn't say concerns, but just how it was laid out, particularly our start of the league. I think it's a very, very challenging start. I mean, I know it's a very and we're saying this amongst tough starts. Everyone's going to have a tough start.
Right.
Amongst all those 16 teams of tough starts, ours is towards, if not the top out of those starts in this conference.
Yeah,
So.
ranked team on the road, and then.
So when you look at the Kim Palm metrics, which assesses every single team in all of Division I college basketball, out of the 18 conference games Carolina's getting set to play, where we sit right now on January the 3rd, 16 of those games are going to be against teams in the top 50 in Kim Palm. And the 2 teams that are outside, Missouri and LSU, are 55th and 57th.
The good news is, if there is any with playing this schedule, that's a lot of opportunity right there. Like, look, South Carolina right now is, I think, 85th in the net rankings, and that is like 30 spots behind the next team, which is LSU, I believe, like 52 or 53. So you're 16th in the SEC essentially right now, even though you haven't played a conference game yet like everyone else. If you go out here and win one of these games to start out, like if you beat Mississippi State tomorrow, that changes everything. You will jump up significantly in the Ken Palm, the net, all that. Like, you will be right in the mix, but you got to keep winning. I think we have the benchmark in mind of you got to win probably 9. You got to go about 500 in SEC play to make the tournament. And why 500? Why not better? Well, first off, if you win, like you just said before, 16 of the games are quad 1. If you end up winning them, like half of those, you're probably in the tournament. Like, if you're a 19-20 win team, you're going to get in. Like, the SEC is going to be a double-digit team league when we get to tournament time in March. And if South Carolina's right there, 9-9, 10-8 on the year, heck, even 8-10, I feel like would get the job done. You're right about there. I think you're in a good position.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens tomorrow. Again, we know Chris Jan's signature at Mississippi State is a physical team that is going to go up there and grab rebounds. You're going to have Keyshawn Murphy and Cameron Matthews to have to deal with both those guys averaging over 7 rebounds a game. Josh Hubbard's second in the SEC when it comes to shooting threes. He had 28 points and went 4 of 10 from 3 last year, the last time these two teams faced off. So very good players across the board, and really going to see just how well this new batch of talent that Coach Paris has is going to match up with a team like that. That, again, it's not the toughest team you're going to face, but I'd say out of the first 3 games you have, gives you the best opportunity to win.
Yeah, like, it'll test South Carolina for sure, these first 3 games. Like, after that, you'll kind of get into a little bit of, I don't even want to say like a little bit more relaxing part of the schedule, but like you got to at least win one of these games just to show that you have a pulse. But look, it's going to be tough. Like Auburn's the best team in college basketball right now, in my opinion. Alabama's not far behind, and Mississippi State's right there. So you talk about how physical Mississippi State is. I do worry about that with South Carolina because I do feel like they struggle to be physical at times. But if they can somewhat match that, I think they can win this game. They just have to be able to find their shots consistently. Guys like Miles Stute, Nick Pringle, Jamari Thomas, they got to be having a good day from the floor. And look, there's no more excuses at this point. Like non-conference play, it was what it was. You went 10-3. Mm-hmm. You had a lot of close games, but you still won 10 games. So that is pretty good to look at. And I know everyone wants to talk about the North Florida loss. That was so long ago. I think this team it's a different team now, and we're going to see what they're made of this weekend for sure.
The Clemson win a couple weeks ago gives me a little more optimism.
Yes.
Because you proved, and that was on your home court, that helps, that you could beat a team that is one of the better ones in college basketball. So it's not impossible. If you've gotten beat by 15 points in that game, then I'd be saying something different. But they've proven they can do it. Now you're going to have to do it on a day-in, day-out basis over the course of the next 2 months.
Exactly, and you got to bring that energy. I just feel like they lacked the energy against Radford and Presbyterian, and granted, both those were coming off of different circumstances. The Clemson win was fresh for the Radford game, and then the Christmas break was the Presbyterian game. So hopefully now with a more normal schedule, the New Year's starting, hopefully this team can get back on track.
We'll dive into it Monday. Be safe on the way to Stark Vegas, and I'm sorry it's not going to be as fun as Orlando was.
Hopefully it'll be a good time. I'm always happy to talk about a win.
Hour number 2 coming up. We're going to take a look back on where we were after the Old Dominion game and what our thought process was about this team at that point in time. That's coming up next. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head, Jack Belcher, along with you on your Football Friday, kind of Football Friday, here on the game. 10 o'clock, welcome back in. Hour number 2, it is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Friday here on The Game. Obviously, for South Carolina, the 2024 season has come to a close. Ended on a sour note, of course, with the loss in the Cheez and Citrus Bowl. But nevertheless, this was still a really, really great season that I think is going to be remembered very fondly. And time heals everything. As we move further and further away from the Citrus Bowl, I think we'll be able to kind of look at the entire season as a whole and be able to reflect on just how good it was, not just how it ended a couple days ago. But I think it's also important to remember, and I think this is what makes this season so good, all things considered, is what we thought of this season at one point, before it and even during it. I mentioned this to Jack a moment ago. You know, going into the year, our expectations for this team, for most of us, I'd say reasonable fans, was somewhere around probably 6 to 7 wins, because you looked at what seemed to be a daunting schedule and thought, man, I don't know. That's tough. How's Carolina going to beat this team? How's Carolina going to beat that team? And we certainly looked at kind of the back half of the schedule as the toughest that Carolina was going to have to face. And I think most of us said, okay, I think there's a path to get back to a bowl game. I don't know if there's much else past that. And again, a lot of the national projections had them even lower than that, around 5 wins, some of them at 6 wins. So many people thought they wouldn't even get back to a bowl game in general. And after the first game against Old Dominion, I think the morale in the fan base was at its lowest point. And I really think it's important to reflect back on where the mindset of a lot of people was, and rightfully so, because that game did not go well compared to how things ended up this season. We obviously have our Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. We appreciate all of you that contribute to it every single day and weigh in on our conversations. I went back yesterday and I dug through a lot of old text messages from September the 2nd, which was the Monday after the Old Dominion game. It was Labor Day, first reaction Monday of the year. A lot of you had thoughts, and I'm not doing this for the purpose of calling anybody out or telling you you were wrong for feeling the way that you were. In fact, I think a lot of what was said was justified because of the one-game sample size that we had up to that point, which was, all things considered, they still won the game, but not good, and didn't instill a lot of hope for what the rest of the season was going to be. I'm bringing these things back up to kind of show you where things were compared to where things end up, because I think perspective is really, having the perspective and hindsight that we have now, it's interesting to look back on where the mindset of a lot of people was, and rightfully so. Again, I get it, because of how that game was against Old Dominion compared to how things ended up with a overall 9-4 campaign and playing in a pretty good bowl game in the Citrus Bowl and just narrowly missing out on the college football playoff. So I got 5 text messages here that came in on September the 2nd. I'm not going to say any names attached to them. If you remember what you texted in, okay. If not, then again, these are just 4 random text messages that I pulled that, again, just I think highlighted a lot of people's thinking back on September the 2nd when things were at the lowest, it seemed like, for a lot of people this season. Text message number 1 says, I keep hearing the excuse of freshmen and transfer players playing their position at Carolina for the first time. Old Dominion replaced 50-plus players. How can Beamer or anybody else use that excuse? We look out of shape and not prepared. And yes, that game was very clunky on all fronts. Offensively, defensively, a couple guys stood out. Well, Kyle Kennard got the forced fumble on the first or second defensive play of the game. But the rest of the game was a lot of up and down. And again, Carolina narrowly escaped. I think we're far enough in to the Beamer tenure now to know that the best football South Carolina plays is probably not going to come until mid to late October and November. And you would ideally like to play your best football in August, September, and the first half of October. That's just, for whatever reason, not the case. Now, is that something that needs to improve? Absolutely. You want them to play great football for all 12 games from beginning to end. But again, based on the trends we know, the best football doesn't come until late in the season, and Old Dominion game is kind of another example of that. They won. Didn't feel like they won, but they did win. They escaped with a victory. but it wasn't their best performance. And if you played Old Dominion again on November the 20th, then I think Carolina wins that game probably by 40 or 50 points because the team got better. And look, when you're starting a redshirt freshman quarterback and replacing a lot of pieces from last year, working a new offensive line, the whole 9 yards, you could kind of expect it was going to be clunky. Maybe not as clunky as it was, but hindsight being 2020, it's understandable that they didn't come out of the gate red hot and firing on all cylinders necessarily. Text message number 2. Despite Lenoris's obvious talent, another quarterback should have played. Someone else might have read the routes better and delivered the passes better. Sellers also might have calmed down some if he watches the game for a few minutes. We knew going into the season, there was no debate that Lenoris Sellers was going to be the starting quarterback. You know, Beamer could dress it up however he wanted it to. There was no open competition, and Robbie Ashford had as equal a chance as anybody, but we knew this was Sellers' job to lose, and there was no doubt in anybody's mind that he was going to be the starter going into game number 1 against Old Dominion. And it seemed like on paper, that's the ideal type of team you wanted to start your first ever game against when you're a redshirt freshman. And for Sellers, it wasn't the prettiest game. 10 of 23, 114 yards, ran for 68 yards on 22 carries. Remember, they were very heavy on the quarterback power in that game, which concerned a lot of people, and ended up running for 1 touchdown. So not the best performance. And really, through the first half of the regular season, his numbers weren't all that spectacular. We saw good plays here and there and those magical moments that showed you what his potential was. But it wasn't really until those last 6 games of the regular season that he really hit his stride and became one of the talks of college football that's going to have a lot of Heisman hype going into next year. So maybe based on, because again, going into the season, we just had small sample sizes of what we saw him do last year. So maybe we set our expectations too high too early. And looking back, expecting a redshirt freshman to take a little bit of time to come into his own was probably a reasonable way to look at things. And again, I'm not saying that anybody's wrong for thinking the way that they were thinking. And a lot of us here on the radio station reacted very similarly to what we saw in that first game as well. Again, this is more about perspective more than anything else about where the mindset was after one game compared to where we sit now after playing a full 12-game regular season as well as a bowl game. Text message number 3. What I need to know is how much money Garnet Trust is lining up for Dylan Stewart. Dylan Stewart made an immediate impact in game number 1 and looked like a true game wrecker that ended up being very true throughout the entire season. Obviously, Garnet Trust has ponied up the funds. You, the fans that have paid into the NIL, have ponied up the funds to make sure Dylan Stewart sticks around Columbia for next year, and that is obviously well and done with. And that was very obvious from game number 1 that he was going to be a big factor for this team this year, which he was on what was a very, very good defense. But text message number 4. Watch 4 to 5 of our SEC competitors this weekend. Unless we find a quarterback that can throw and a strong offensive line that can block, we may not win a single SEC game. So the doom and gloom of not winning a single conference game was being thrown out there after game number 1. Again, Sellers, not his best performance, didn't really come into his own until the back half of the season. The offensive line, that was something we wanted to see more optimism out of early on in the season, because that was the liability of this team a year ago that prevented Spencer Rattler from being as great as he could have been in his final year at Carolina. Lenoris Sellers got sacked 4 times against Old Dominion. Didn't instill a lot of hope. In fact, through the first, doing the math here, 8, 10, through the first 5 games of the regular season, he got sacked 20 times. Not good, including just getting mauled by that Ole Miss defensive front in that game against them. Or the first 5 games he played, He didn't play against Akron, so don't count those numbers there. But in the first 5 games he played, he got sacked 20 times. The offensive line got better down the stretch. Lenoris Sellers also got better just eluding pressure and escaping and, making those fantastic plays. But the offensive line didn't end up being what we wanted it to, but they made it work because you had just an athletic freak at quarterback that showed his talent in the last half of the season. Last text message here, number 5. Why is everyone ignoring the bigger issue of the lack of talent on South Carolina's team? Yes, they have a few high-level players, but watching the Old Dominion game, most South Carolina's players looked undersized or slow. Kentucky will look to run up the score for revenge for the last 2 years, and I don't see how Carolina can stop them. Too much of a talent gap. So we were questioning the talent level that South Carolina had on both sides of the football after that one game. And remember, Kentucky played that 2.5 quarters against Southern Miss because they got lightning that eventually canceled the last half of that game, but they looked flawless in those 2.5 quarters. We went into game number 2 thinking, a lot of people thought, that Kentucky was going to blow the doors off Carolina. That obviously didn't end up being the case, and Carolina won that game, pretty handily by 25 points. But when you play a group of 5 team, especially one as below average as Old Dominion was coming into the season, you expect to see a clear differential in the talent level between the SEC team and the group of 5 team. And again, Texter, you're not wrong. We didn't really see that in game number 1. And that worried all of us because we looked at that and said, well, if you can't perform better against Old Dominion, how are you going to fare against Alabama? How are you going to fare against Ole Miss and all these other teams? And again, going back to the first text message, we now know Beamer teams in general just play their best football at the end of the year. But you would have obviously loved to have seen a better start out of the gate for what we had against Old Dominion. And when you didn't, it sent a lot of panic through the entire fan base. And we reacted to it all day long on Monday. Like, man, if you can't do that, can't do better than this, then what's the rest of the season going to look like? And again, you were sitting at 3-3 halfway through the year, albeit with close games against LSU and Alabama. But we're still pretty low on the team at that point in time because you proved you couldn't beat a ranked team and hadn't done so for 2 years. Then you finally turned it on against Texas A&M and had that one against a top 10 opponent, and the rest of the regular season was history. But again, I think it's important to have perspective and to look back on where our mindset was, not just for us, but everybody, it seemed like. And outside of Gamecock Larry, RIP, of course, I think most people were down on this team. Most people, after one game, thought it was going to be a wash of a season, and there was no way they're going to be able to compete with the murderer's row of a schedule that it looked like they had, and they did. And they proved a lot of us wrong. And I'll probably do the same thing next year after game number 1 against Virginia Tech, and then after whatever the end of the regular season and postseason ends up being, to get good perspective. But for Carolina, and credit to Shane Beamer and company, his entire coaching staff, for the dramatic improvements we saw week after week and from the beginning of the season to the end. And for that reason, I think, again, as time goes on and we can reflect back on the season more as a whole compared to just looking back at the Citrus Bowl, this was a special year, and this team proved a lot of people wrong, including many of us here in Columbia, on what they're capable of. And again, hats off to Beamer and company for accomplishing that. Talk to our guy Joe Machika from the Big Spur coming up next. We know he's a resident Notre Dame guy. We'll let him get a little bit of gloating in as well coming up next. It is the Extra Point Tower Head on your Friday here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Friday here on the Game. And as we do each and every Friday, check with our guy Joe Machika from the Big Spur. We will talk about women's basketball and things going on with the Gamecocks in just a couple minutes. But for those that listen to this program enough, they know Joe is our resident Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And Joe was feeling pretty good yesterday with what went down in the Sugar Bowl down there in New Orleans. Joe, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to gloat as much as you want. So 3, 2, 1, the floor is yours.
All right, Tyler, first off, I'm going to say my heart goes out to all the victims in New Orleans, first off. Like, that's the unbelievable tragedy that occurred down there on New Year's Day. I totally agree with moving the football game over to the second, but at the end of it, Notre Dame was able to get the job done. Marcus Freeman had Gunnar Stockton seeing ghosts with some of those blitzes. Al Golden had Gunnar Stockton seeing ghosts. And so Notre Dame somehow, wins a college football quarterfinal game headed to the semis without throwing a vertical downfield pass because Riley Leonard is inept or unable to throw a vertical downfield pass. So somehow win the game. I think Notre Dame and everybody in South Bend is kind of just happy to be here at this point. So I don't know. That's a lot longer than 10 seconds, Tyler. But I mean, I don't know. Crazy game yesterday.
That was about 45 seconds, but you're on a roll, so I'll let you run there. Look, I thought, and look, Notre Dame won 11 games. And in most of those games outside of the loss to NIU, they dominated those games. Didn't really have trail much this season and were the physically better team against a lot of opponents they played. Going up against Georgia, just from a pure number standpoint in size, Georgia was the biggest team they'd faced the entire year. And I thought that was going to be an advantage for Georgia. I didn't think it was going to completely neutralize what Notre Dame was doing, but I thought they were going to have a tougher time playing this type of football they played this entire year. And man, like you said, they wreaked havoc. They put pressure on Gunnar Stockton the entire game. They ran the ball pretty much at will, especially in the second half, which was very important when they were draining the clock. Yep. And, again, something we very rarely have seen in the Kirby Smart era at Georgia, just physically manhandled a Georgia team.
Yeah, and right, Tyler, to your point, I wasn't sure how that happened when, Georgia has as much size advantage as they do, right? It's almost like their offensive line, they got, punctured a couple times, or the pocket got punctured a couple times, and then they just lost confidence, right? It's been one of the best offensive lines in college football, and they almost looked like scared or defeated, after Notre Dame kept breaking the pocket a couple times. So I don't know, at the beginning of the game when you saw that coin toss and Georgia walked out there with the monsters that they have on their offensive line and on their defense, we were kind of like, this, here goes the Alabama game again. This could get ugly.
Right.
This might be, a blowout. But I don't know. Notre Dame found Marcus. I think that's kind of goes into the Marcus Freeman effect, right? Going into areas where Brian Kelly cannot, couldn't win. I've heard there have been a bunch of people down in Columbia tell me that Marcus Freeman isn't the right man for the job, which is after this game is crazy to think. Crazy.
Let's hear a little bit from Marcus Freeman after the game. Cut number 15 here, Dave. This is Marcus Freeman on his team's dominant defensive performance.
We had 3 keys to victory on defense, and number 1 was to stop the run. And we didn't believe that we could lose this game by passing yards, but we could lose if we don't stop the run, and the defense did an amazing job at stopping the run, and that put them in some difficult third down situations. And then another key to victory was takeaways, and the defense got 2 takeaways, a couple of turnover on downs, which were huge. They were relentless. The one drive, I wasn't too concerned because a couple of their big plays were uncharacteristic defensive mistakes. We didn't get a call, this guy didn't get the check, and that doesn't happen to this group often. So I said, okay, we're good. Get it fixed. Go back out there. When they get the next opportunity, it'll be fine. And they responded in a great way.
So obviously they contained Georgia's rushing attack, held them to 2.1 yards per carry. And I think the biggest play of the entire game, right before halftime, is when they forced Georgia to fumble. They forced the fumble against Gunnar Stockton when they were backed up against their own goal line. Immediately cashed that in for a touchdown. Suddenly it's 13-3 going into the half, and then Harrison comes out right after halftime, returns the kick, and boom, it's 20-3 with 14:45 to go in the third quarter. And you kept waiting for Georgia to do something, right? Because we've seen this Georgia team play from behind so many times this year. They were down 17 in the second half against Tech and found a way to claw back and win that game. You're waiting for that moment. And then they did get the one touchdown with Cash Jones. You thought, okay, here comes the spark. And it feels like, I know this isn't the case, it felt like they never touched the ball again after that. Because after that point, Notre Dame just ran the ball at will, drained the clock, and Georgia didn't have anything.
Yeah, Tyler, being able to run the ball at will, and then the substitution thing that Marcus Freeman did was to do it in that situation on 4th and 1, subbing all 11 guys off before the ball. It was before the ball was set, so it is technically still legal.
Yep.
I saw was the correction about it, but to do that in that spot was kind of crazy. And then I know it was a first half thing, but I know a lot of Notre Dame fans are sending or buying a lot of Parker Jones jerseys this morning.
Oh my goodness.
As well.
What a completely insane thing to happen.
Absolutely insane, right? And so you talk about things that didn't go Georgia's way, right? They didn't have the big play that usually sets it off, and the fan base explodes, and you hear all the barking, and it's like, oh God, like here we go again. Like it's here comes Georgia, the red and black coming down the track. Like there just weren't enough moments like that where like the fan base it's like, oh, here we go, like here comes Georgia. And then the Parker Jones thing, I guess, playing on the anti side of that, it's just a wild, weird thing that happened, not in the Dogs' favor, that just, added to the things that was like, what the heck?
Yeah, it just wasn't Georgia's day. And again, this has been a Georgia team that's been up and down this year. And I'd say this is probably the worst team Kirby's had since his first year there back in 2016, which, again, still making the playoffs and winning the SEC is a huge accomplishment. But, again, they just got physically beat by a better Notre Dame team last night that now has the opportunity to go on and play for the semifinals and a shot at playing for the national championship. And I think it's important to note, you mentioned Brian Kelly, because the knock on Notre Dame, not just during the Kelly era, but really over the past 25 years, is when they get in these big BCS, New Year's Six, college football playoff games, whatever you want to call them, they can't win those. They were 0 for 8 in the prior BCS New Year's Six type of games. This is the first one they've won since the early 90s when, Lou Holtz was there coaching. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This was a program-defining win and something that's going to be a huge feather in the cap for a guy in Marcus Freeman, who, again, when Brian Kelly left a couple of years ago to go to LSU, he had the message of, well, I've taken this Notre Dame program as far as I can take it. I can only do so much with what I have here. And everybody's like, well, if he can't do much with this anymore with this, what can Marcus Freeman do? And Marcus Freeman, again, they had the bad loss to NIU earlier on in week number 2 of the year, have played flawless down the stretch, and had a statement win against one of the powers of college football these past couple of years. This, I think, is going to change a lot of people's opinions on him.
I certainly agree, Tyler. And again, it certainly changed the Notre Dame perspective on him, right? You knew he was coming in to try to do what Kelly couldn't. And again, he's just found the gaps, right? Like he was able to win that game without the size advantage and, just without Riley Leonard being able to throw a ball more than 20 yards, right? Like that was always the biggest thing coming in. And Kirby said they were going to make him one-dimensional, and then Riley Leonard's able to escape the pocket, and to Freeman's genius, he was able to let Leonard escape the pocket. Georgia wasn't ready for the quarterback to scramble like he did. And so I don't know. I just think Marcus Freeman was able to win the game with the same hand that Brian Kelly was dealt, right? You're undersized. You're dealing with more speed and then less athleticism, if you will. And Freeman got the job done. We'll see what happens in Miami against Penn State, and then certainly if I think they've got a good chance in that game, but against Ohio State or Texas, I don't know about all that. I certainly don't want to be guaranteeing a national championship here, but I don't know. We'll see how far they can go. I'm still super optimistic about the Irish.
Well, we'll touch on that a little bit more on the other side, as well as get Joe's latest on women's basketball as they picked up their first conference win of the season last night, taking down the Missouri Tigers. That's up next. It is The Extra Point. Tyler Head and Joe Machiko from the Big Spur hanging out with you on your Friday here in the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Friday. Check out our guy, Joe Machika from thebigspur.com, as we do each and every Friday. Of course, talk a lot about what happened last night in New Orleans with Notre Dame taking out Georgia 23-10 in the Sugar Bowl to advance into the semifinals of the college football playoff, where one more note kind of on Notre Dame before we move on to women's basketball. You know, I know it's kind of easy to kind of look at them as maybe the underdog that's remaining. And I think Ohio State's the best team. It's probably going to win the national championship in a couple weeks. But if they can play like they did last night, then there's no reason they can't beat anybody else, right?
I'm with you, Tyler. I think, if they play like they do last night, like you said, there's probably no way. Like, again, this Ohio State team's loaded. I think that's who comes out of that game. And so I don't know. I think they might possess a little bit too much, but I think certainly against Penn State, you're an underdog, but you have to do the little things right, like you did yesterday. You're probably not gonna have a size advantage, but I mean, against Georgia, you didn't have one either. So again, it just goes back. I mean, Notre Dame football has always been winning the game in areas that you have the advantage in, because you're not going to win the game in advantage or in areas that they might have a slight edge or trying to be somebody else. So if they continue to play their brand of football, like, everything should be just fine for Marcus Freeman as they return to South Bend.
Well, the women's basketball team in action coming up on Sunday. They'll take on Mississippi State on the road in Stark Vegas, much like the men's team will do coming up tomorrow for game number 2 of conference play after starting off conference play on the road last night in Columbia, Missouri, with a pretty routine win when you look at the final score of 83-52 over the Missouri Tigers. But as has kind of been the case for just about every single game this year, there's a period of time in the first half where this team looks very discombobulated and not playing its best basketball. They got it together after playing a pretty rough second quarter and end up pulling away, as this team often does, against opponents that they outmatch. And last night, Missouri was the latest example of that.
Yeah, absolutely, Tyler. They looked good against Missouri. Their MO, especially as of late, to be winning games has been shooting pretty darn close to 50% or well over it. They didn't have a great first half. I believe we're in the 30s for that shooting percentage, but we're able to come out in the second half and bring that back up. I think they shot 57, 58, something, 59% in the second half. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now. But, certainly started to take a lot better shots, started to force a lot more turnovers in that second half. Up there in Como. So I think they looked good. There's a couple players that shined coming off the bench, which is good. Miriam Dowdle looked great against Wofford, so it was big for Adele Tack to get her career high against Missouri. Everybody in that bench, Tyler, continues to carve out a role and stand out in one way or another, and it's exactly what you need.
Yeah, you mentioned they shot 37% from the field in the first half, 60% in half number 2, and held Missouri to just 27% in the second half of that game. And that's the thing that's kind of been a trend with this team is they just play lights out typically after halftime. And again, when you're playing a lot of these teams, that's not a problem because you can get off to a little bit of a clunkier start and kind of find your rhythm and be okay. But as we saw against UCLA, when you play these really, really elite and great teams, if you don't get off the bus well enough, you're not going to have an opportunity because those teams don't ever end up slowing down. And as I'm kind of looking ahead to what's going to be a very tough schedule, you play Texas, the number 5 team in a couple weeks. You play Oklahoma, a top 10 team. You got LSU coming to town at the end of the month. You play some very high-level teams right out of the 8. Not to mention playing on the road at Texas later on in the year, playing against UConn in the annual matchup these two teams have. So you've got a lot of opponents that if you start off slow or you play a bad second quarter, you could find yourself in a hole once again like against UCLA that you can't manage to dig yourself out of, and that does concern me.
Yeah, absolutely, Tyler. Same here. This squad has, a jam-packed January ahead of them. After they get through Mississippi State, I believe it's 3 or 4 ranked games in a row. They're going to have to pick it up. I think what impressed me most about last night was the way that they were just kind of in that first half shooting 37%. that's kind of playing meh basketball. Like, they're still getting the job done, right? They're still, up by 10 and kind of letting them hang around a little bit. But, the way that they kind of turned the corner in that second half and were able to flip the switch and then instantly, like, turn into a 60% shooting team and the world beaters that they are, is pretty impressive. Like, it usually takes a lot of teams, a while to turn out of that funk. This team has learned from it. They've been able to, find a way to get out of that funk as quickly as possible and turn the tide in their direction pretty quickly.
Well, and one thing that, we know is a signature of a Coach Staley coach team is the physicality and being able to really kind of dominate down in the paint. And that kind of seemed to be the MO of the second half yesterday. Not to say that they weren't shooting great from the outside at the end of the game. 4 of 15, obviously not great overall, but they kind of locked in the second half of that game and said, we're just going to go in and be the more physical, more dominant team down in the paint. And that's what they did against Missouri, and they didn't really have any answer for that.
No, they didn't, Tyler. And these point guards are getting involved in the post, which is huge. I believe Bree Hall had 7 rebounds last night, which is huge. Only behind Ashton Watkins is 11. So these guards are getting involved. Malaysia Full Wiley had another great game. Leading all scorers, I believe. So Full Wiley's cooking. Everybody's cooking. Tessa Johnson's getting involved, too. So when your bench is scoring, after yesterday, but going into yesterday, your bench was scoring 51% of your points, which is insane, Tyler, when your bench is able to do that. It's so deep, as we know. But, the fact that – and then everybody on the bench is getting involved. Like I mentioned, Adele Tack standing out last night. So Dawn is continuing to show or empty the bag on this bench and continuing to show how good players continue to mesh with each other on this bench.
Yeah, last night, bench scored 57 points, which actually outscored Missouri as they do to a lot of opponents. So you also didn't have Maddie McDaniel, who's dealing with the effects of her concussion. She didn't make the trip with the team, so she's another one that you're going to be able to add back to that bench very soon. That's just going to add another thing to, what makes this team so tough. And that's a mark of any Dawn Staley coach team is they're always going to be deep. And that is – I guess what makes them so much better in the second half than these opponents is when you're able to go to your second and third level of player and still not really drop off in production compared to what these other teams are doing when you have players in foul trouble and all that kind of stuff. And that is, depth is a good thing, and they have a lot of it, and that will hopefully prove beneficial in these tough games they have coming up. But especially with already having a loss under your belt, I think we're more weary than ever that this team could trip up again, and we'll certainly hope that doesn't happen. We'll see.
Yeah, and even if they do, Tyler, I think, again, based on the way that they've been responding and the way that they've been growing and adapting to situations where, again, like I mentioned, like being able to flip the switch from shooting 37% to 60 is pretty good. I think that should give this fan base a lot of hope. And again, even if you do stumble up, like I don't think it's room for concern. I think this team, it will mean at the end of it that they're battle tested, right? And I think it's a good thing. And certainly the only thing is you just can't lose any games in that tournament, right? And I think even if they do lose another one going up into it, they're going to be prepared for tournament basketball. Their schedule's too hard not to be.
So, again, they'll play Mississippi State coming up on Sunday. Tip for that game is a 2 o'clock pregame coverage starting at 1:30 right here on the game. Mississippi State did end up falling to Kentucky in their SEC opener, 91-69. That's a very good Kentucky team that's 12-1 on the season so far, and their numbers pretty disappointing overall. Only shot 35% of the field, 26% from three-point range. So South Carolina will be getting a team coming off of a tough loss themselves in Mississippi State.
Yeah, absolutely, Tyler. And again, got to take care of that one. I know Starkville's a long ways away too, but you just had to travel to Como. Easy trip up, easy trip down. Make it in and out of Starkville, and then I believe there's a home game on the schedule. So back home for some home cooking before everything really takes off for this squad. So, I think they're in a good spot. They're in a good position. There's no reason for concern for this women's basketball team. They're playing cohesive. They're playing as a unit. So all good things over, at Colonial Life in terms of this women's team.
He is Joe Machika from thebigspur.com. We'll check in with you again coming up next Friday, and we'll have 2 more women's basketball games to talk about between Mississippi State and a home game against Texas A&M coming up next Thursday. Appreciate it as always, Joe.
Yeah, Tyler, appreciate you having me, and sorry about your dogs, man.
Hey, it happens, man. Congratulations to the Fighting Irish, and excited to see what they do for the rest of the college football playoff. We'll come back, wrap up hour number 2 of the Extra Point. Who's the biggest loser in a bowl season so far? Might just be the SEC. That's next here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head wrapping up hour number 2 here on your Friday. Wes Mitchell jumping here with me at 11 o'clock for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Reminder, craft beer card still available on 1075thegame.com. Click on the Sweet Deals tab. You can purchase it for just $59. Saves you around $300 at a lot of local establishments that sell craft beer here in the Columbia area. So again, go online to 1075thegame.com. Click on the Sweet Deals tab to purchase your craft beer card. We are effectively almost done with bowl season. We, of course, still have the semifinals with those games coming up next week, and then the national championship. Still 3 bowl games. Got the Servpro First Responders Bowl today at 4. Got the Dukes Mayo Bowl tonight at 7:30. And then shout out to Pete Limbo and the Buffalo Bulls taking as they head off to the Bahamas tomorrow for the last non-playoff bowl taking place. As it's to me bowl season is the funnest time of year because we got games on pretty much all day, every day, and you get a fill of it over the course of roughly 2 weeks, right around Christmas and going past the new year. And a lot of conversation going into the bowl season and playoff season was obviously the strength of the SEC. And we here in Columbia, South Carolina, are within the bubble of the SEC that extends as far west as Texas and as far north as Kentucky. And we, rightfully so, pride ourselves, as is everyone in the conference, on the strength of what the conference is, where it's long been the standard of playing the best football, producing the best talent, the whole 9 yards, to where when we were having conversations at the end of November, early December, about who should make the college football playoff, a lot of the arguments being made were, a 9-3 Alabama team or a 9-3 Carolina or a 9-3 Ole Miss deserves to be in the playoff over an SMU, deserves to be in the playoff over an Indiana, because those teams didn't have to go through the grind of the SEC. They didn't have to play high-level games week in, week out and all those kind of things. And that was what the overwhelming conversation was. And I feel like going into bowl season, the SEC had a lot to prove. Because, again, for more often than not, they are the standard. And they are the league that everybody just universally accepts as the best in college football. But this year it felt like a little bit of a shift with how much parity there had been across the sport of college football. There's a lot of skepticism on if that was true or not. If truly the SEC across the board truly was head and shoulders better than everybody else. And when you look at the results of bowl season, I think it hurts the SEC's arguments in a lot of ways. Tennessee got skull-drug by Ohio State in round 1 of the playoff. Georgia got dominated by Notre Dame last night in the Sugar Bowl. Texas, still a bullet left in the chamber, but they got outplayed by Arizona and still found a way to win. But still, they were not the better team in that game. At least that's what it seemed. And when you expand outside of that, look at Carolina losing the Citrus Bowl to an Illinois team that most people on paper would say was inferior to South Carolina. Not by much, but we certainly thought Carolina was the better team going into the game. They lost that. Alabama loses to Michigan in the ReliaQuest Bowl earlier on that day. Again, another team that people were making a strong argument for should have been in the college football playoff. And one bowl season, one postseason does not change the perception of an entire conference, but especially if Texas doesn't win the national championship, which I don't think they will. Again, I said it earlier. I think Texas is going to get their doors blown off by Ohio State, just like Ohio State did to Tennessee and just like Ohio State did to Oregon the other day in the Rose Bowl. If the SEC for the second year in a row is not even playing for the national championship, it's not going to happen overnight. But I think the perception can slowly start to shift a little bit. And I'm not saying that the SEC is not the best conference and won't be going forward. But I think the benefit of the doubt that the SEC has been leaps and bounds, head and shoulders better than everybody else may start to change. I'm not saying I'm supportive of that. I'm not saying I'm making the argument myself. I'm just saying from a national standpoint, that may start to change. And what does that matter? Well, when we talk about the college football playoff selection process, which is all about a group of people sitting together in a room, deciding which teams are the best in college football and which ones are going to get the opportunity to play for the national championship or the tournament to play for a national championship, that bias and perception matters. Because, again, it seems like the SEC gets the benefit of the doubt more often than not. And, of course, for teams like Carolina, Ole Miss, and Alabama, they lost 3 games. And when you're going head-to-head with teams that lost 1 game, that's a harder argument to make. But there's no doubt in anybody's mind that if Alabama didn't lose to Oklahoma, if Ole Miss hadn't lost to Kentucky earlier on in the year, they're likely in. And we're talking about, 4 teams being in the college football playoff or something along those lines for the SEC. Doesn't mean they fare better, but they would have gotten the benefit of the doubt for how they performed in the regular season. And I guess we kind of knew with talent getting spread out so much. And that's something that sticks out to me about why Georgia lost last night, or just why this Georgia season's not been as good as the prior couple, because they're not 3 deep at every spot anymore. That was the thing that made Georgia so good in those national championship years. And yes, there was still transfer portal and stuff like that, but not to the level that it is now, where they just had NFL talent, in tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 at seemingly every single spot. It's not the case anymore. Yeah, tier 1 is, but when you get down to the second levels, it's not quite the case. And that's something that's affected them. That's something that affects a lot of SEC teams because the talent gets spread out. Whether it be guys looking for more playing time or guys looking for better NIL opportunities, it's not just the SEC hoarding all the best talent anymore. What does that mean for the future of college football? I don't know. But I'd say sitting here right now that the gap between the SEC and some of these other conferences isn't quite as wide as maybe we initially thought. And it's going to be interesting to see how much that perception, if it continues to, evolves over time, especially if the SEC is not even playing for national championships again over the next couple of years, because there's a very good chance for the second year in a row they won't have a dog in the fight playing for the title on January the 20th. But just kind of an observation that's intriguing to me based on how things have gone down in bowl season so far. And again, Texas still's the hope left, and we'll see what they end up doing as they take on Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl coming up next Friday. That'll do it for today's edition of The Extra Point. Coming up next, Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Friday here on The Game. 11 o'clock on your Friday morning. Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head and Wes Mitchell along with you, wrapping up your holiday week. Monday will finally feel normal because then it'll actually be a Monday. Today's felt like Tuesday for some reason because we had Wednesday off, and we finally get back to normal. Yesterday was Monday. Finally get back to normal, and next week's going to feel like the longest week ever because we actually have to do stuff for 5 straight days. But get back to normal next week.
Too.
I know. Well, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, we always do.
Thanks,
we're going to listen to some more music there.
I guess so.
By the way, I haven't sent in.
I was going to ask you and Chris got to send me your.
We got to submit our
music request. We're gonna overhaul this whole music situation here because we can make it better.
Even better, Firehouse Subs text line.
Yes.
Why don't you send in some good intro music for us in and out of breaks?
Absolutely. Firehouse Subs text line 834-46100. I am planning on overhauling all the music for our rejoiners. So let us know what you would like to hear. It's got to be clean, or I can just play the instrumental, I guess. But hit us up. Let us know what you want to hear.
Bringing all my Larkin Poe vinyl to you. Is that good?
You want some Larkin Poe, Dave?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, I kind of figured that. You got a vinyl?
Yeah, vinyl.
Can I convert the vinyl to an MP3?
Yes.
I'll let you handle that one, Dave.
Okay.
But if you have a request for a specific song, I'll see if I can work it in. How about that?
Okay. I can get them to say hello, too.
Oh, if we can get a shout-out? Can we get them to record an intro for us? Like, hey, you're listening to the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour? Would they do that? They only cameo or something?
June.
Can we get them to do our own theme song?
Even better. A personalized theme song. Would they do that?
I'm not sure. They're Grammy winners now, so they're...
Well, even better. Well, what's their rate? It'd be like 30 seconds.
Probably 20, 30,000.
We'll get back to them on that. Either way, we'll look to make some improvements in the music as we venture into the new year. Of course, we're only a couple days removed from what happened in the Citrus Bowl. Carolina falling to Illinois. No S, Illinois. I know I've been saying it wrong. 21-17. And look, this loss is going to sting for a while. I've been trying to give some perspective a lot of this morning on, as we move away from that game, being able to reflect on the season as a whole, which, considering where we thought we were going to be at the beginning of the year, and I went back and reread a lot of text messages that came in on the Firehouse Subs text line from that first reaction Monday after the Old Dominion game, compared to where we are now, 9-day difference. The expectations were not high on what the team is going to be able to accomplish after that game. You win 9 games. You beat a bunch of ranked opponents. You go on a 6-game winning streak. Lenore Sellers comes into his own in the last 6 games of the season. All things considered, a very successful year.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point. There were certain expectations prior to the year that weren't necessarily incredibly high, but I would say the expectations were at an absolute low point after that Old Dominion game.
Yes.
Then I would say after the Ole Miss game, they maybe weren't quite as low, but they had
again.
They were, it was hanging by a thread a little bit in terms of the fan positivity and positive engagement and stuff like that. And then, team has a meeting and they say, look, goal right now is just to win out. Like, that's the plan. That's what we're going to do. And that was when Beamer met with the sort of team leaders, the guys that maybe speak for the rest of the team. And that's what they went and did. So this ended up being a special year, all things considered. Would 10 wins have been great? Of course. And would it feel a little bit different right now if you had the momentum of a bowl game win over a Big Ten team on top of everything else that happened? Yeah, I think we can acknowledge that. At the same time, eventually, and I've already seen a little shift in terms of, like, right after the game, the first 48 hours, rightfully so, the attention is, oh, man, that was a winnable game. Carolina did not do what they needed to do to win the game. I feel like you're already seeing a little bit of a shift to, like, hey, 9-4, I'll take that most years, especially when you come in and Vegas is telling you, hey, your over-under doesn't even put you in a bowl game, basically. Right. So I think for a lot of fans, it is equally disappointing to lose the final one while having some gratitude about the exciting times that this season brought. And you do still have a win over Clemson, which I we were in and off in terms of being on air leading up to, like, Christmas and all that, but it did strike me a little bit how Clemson fans were still kind of going at South Carolina a little bit about, Clemson being in the playoffs, South Carolina not, et cetera, et cetera. But there's nothing a Clemson fan can do or say that changes the fact that South Carolina won the game in Clemson 17-14.
Right.
So you have bragging rights for the 365 days or 364 days following that game. You have bragging rights.
Right.
And so there's nothing, them going to the playoffs, South Carolina not, doesn't change a thing. South Carolina has those bragging rights. So there is a lot to take away from this season. And I'll be very curious to see the narrative, which we have all offseason talk about it, but the narrative for this South Carolina team as we move forward, when you consider what was a surprise season for them from what a lot of people had them framed up to be. Now, add in the fact that you're losing a lot of talent from this team.
Yes, you are. And a lot of the reason why people weren't as high on the team going into the season, and I understand, revolved around Lenore Sellers having never started a game before. We go back to those preseason, projections of, top 16 quarterbacks in the SEC. Where do they rank? And Sellers was, 15th or 16th in a lot of people's eyes just because he'd not proven anything yet. We saw him in a couple of plays in garbage time in year number one and showed great potential in those games, but we didn't know what he was going to be as a full-fledged starter. And I understand the reason for skepticism around that. Now that you saw him play his best down the stretch in those last 6 games of the regular season, and all things considered, played very well the other night, just didn't end up, doing enough to be able to help the team win against Illinois. He's going to have a ton of hype surrounding him going into the year. Yes, you're going to be replacing a lot of guys on defense, a very historic defense that we're going to remember for a long time. But when you have the quarterback situation figured out, I feel like that is going to skew everybody's perception of you a lot more positive as compared to, well, we don't really know what the starting quarterback is going to be like for this team.
Yeah, and I think that actually can be dangerous a little bit. Like, remember when South Carolina finished the 2022 year on a high note, and you're going, well, hey, they beat Clemson, they beat Tennessee, they were in a great bowl game with Notre Dame that could have gone either way. Spencer Rattler's coming back, and they're created quite a bit of hype for that team. And I think even internally, people were going, man, we're going to be relying on a lot of young players, a lot of inexperienced players. So the interesting thing about college football these days is you can go ahead and start to even talk about what 2025 might look like today. But we don't have any idea what this final roster is going to look like. And so what do you do in the portal in the next couple of weeks as we get down towards that, I guess, drop-dead date in terms of when you can enroll in classes? And, Carolina's going to have players on campus this coming week. There's a dead period right now, but it opens up. Also, today is obviously the 3rd. Mm-hmm. For Carolina, their 5-day window will have been triggered on the 1st. Right. So you basically have to survive through January 5th without guys having entered the portal. And so far, in terms of the other aspect of this is, you lose a lot of guys to the NFL, to eligibility. You look around, Tyler, lots of teams, lots of good football teams losing players to the transfer portal.
Right.
South Carolina, to this point, the retention has been fantastic. The guys they have wanted to keep so far have all stayed.
Yeah.
Is it possible to actually essentially bat 1,000 in terms of retention? We'll find out.
Sure. But
that's pretty rare these days. Even Carolina thinking they were in good shape to keep a lot of guys the last couple of years. We all know about the Juice Wells situation. We all remember Marshawn Lloyd and Jordan Birch. Mm-hmm. Even when you keep most of the guys you want to keep, there's maybe always one or two. So far, they've been able to keep everybody.
Well, and in the 2 most successful seasons Beamer's had this past year and 2022, they did a really good job bringing in impact guys in the transfer portal. Go back to 2022, you got Spencer Rattler and Juice Wells. that came in. Go back to this past season. Obviously, Kyle Kennard. Obviously, Rocket Sanders. Demetrius Knight ended up being a star, in the middle of that defense. So having guys in the portal that come in and make the kind of impact you need them to make is a key to them being successful, probably once again in 2025. And again, we don't know what all these guys are going to end up being, but you're addressing the areas that you need to address. Edge. You're addressing the offensive line, defensive line. You didn't really need a quarterback, but it's neat that you got Aaron Nolan. We didn't really get a chance to talk about that. That surprised a lot of people, but maybe that's kind of more of a long-term play because he is a guy that's a little bit younger than Lenore Sellers, but the more the merrier in the quarterback room because you definitely did need to add at least one more body in there more likely than not.
Yeah, and I think you did need to add a quarterback when you look at not having Robbie Ashford back. I mean, you need a guy who you are comfortable stepping in and being your backup. And so bringing in a guy like Aaron Nolan, who put up astronomical numbers in high school, number 5 quarterback in the country, that to me was potentially like you hope you never have to use your backup quarterback.
Sure.
But as much as Sellers is going to run,
I think it surprised a lot of people from the standpoint. I think they were looking at him as somebody that wanted to transfer somewhere and start right away, where you're coming into this knowing, well, I'm going to be the backup to Lenore Sellers, much like Robbie Ashford did a year ago, who, again, had his ups and downs in a starter when he was at Auburn. It made a little bit more sense where I think a lot of people viewed Aaron Nolan with how hyped he was coming out of high school that, he's going to go somewhere and want to start right away, which likely is not going to be the case here.
Yeah, I think for him, he is probably looking ahead saying, hey, if I can sit right now and then Sellers, if he has the year he expects, he can go be a first-round pick. And so now I'm set up perfectly to be the guy. I think Aaron Nolan probably saw the writing on the wall too with Julian Sayin at Ohio State.
Yep.
And if you're in the room and a guy is the same class as you and you see, well, that guy's always taking reps ahead of me in practice, probably not a good sign for you and for the future. So I think it's a very resourceful get for South Carolina. It's smart. I think Darren Usher, South Carolina's director of player personnel, the prior relationship there. You go back before there were the coaching changes at Auburn. Aaron Nolan visited Auburn, which is where Darren Usher was before he was at Oregon.
Yep.
He visited there a ton of times. So I think a lot of times in the portal, too, those prior relationships do matter. And this was a case of there being some trust. And honestly, you kind of look at his decision, it shows some wherewithal, in my opinion, in terms of, well, I don't have to go to the place where I'm going to be guaranteed a starting job.
Right.
And maybe it's not quite as good of a situation versus let me go to a place that's up and coming. I might have to sit a year, but long term, it might be a good play for me.
Plenty of track in the offseason when it comes to transfer portal, and we'll follow it as it goes along. But a big commitment yesterday for South Carolina for the 2025 high school class we'll dive into coming up next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here in the game.
All right, guys, this show, as always, presented by our friends over at Firehouse Subs. Almost lunchtime now. Hit them up, firehousesubs.com, or do what we do. Make sure you've got the Firehouse Subs app. Hopefully you already have it. If you don't, hit the App Store, download it. You can order your food right there with the Rapid Rescue to Go. Avoid the wait. Order online. Again, you can do that either any website, or any browser, firehousesubs.com, or by using the app. Sign up, and you're going to get points every single time you order. Then you can go back and turn those points in for free food. If you want to try something new, try the new French dip with premium cut roast beef, some garlic butter on the bread, and, of course, that au jus sauce that makes it on the side. Hot sauce bar is back, too. Add some flavor, add some heat to any sub when you dine in or pick up with a ton of great options on the hot sauce bar. Again, hit up our friends at Firehouse Subs, firehousesubs.com, or by downloading the Firehouse Subs app.
First I want to thank God for putting me in this position. Next, I want to thank all the schools, that believed in my talents and, what I could bring to the next level. I want to thank Under Armour for giving me the platform to be able to be here today. And I want to thank my family again. I love them to death, and I'm ready to make this decision. So for the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to. University of South Carolina. Go Gamecocks.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler and Wes along with you on your Friday here on the game. That was last night prior to the Under Armour All-American game. 4-star Irmo wide receiver Donovan Murph making his official commitment to the Gamecocks. Proceeded also have a pretty spectacular one-hand catch in that game too, which was pretty neat to see. You guys have been tracking this for a long time. Felt very good about his possibility of landing with the Gamecocks, and it finally came to fruition last night.
Yeah, good get, man. Great receiver class for South Carolina. And, you kind of get a sense from just even that little clip, Tyler, of what type of maturity this kid has, despite being someone who is enrolling early, who is reclassifying for 2026 to 2025. And, just presents himself well and then goes out. And he already had a great catch in the Under Armour practices. And there were some juniors in the game as well. But for the most part, this is still a senior showcase. So he's out there kind of playing up a little bit, making plays, had the one-handed grab. And this is, in my opinion, an alpha-type wide receiver. Like, this is a guy who wants the ball in his hands with the game on the line. This is a guy who, ball in the air, I'm going to go get it, brings the energy. Kind of, I like receivers who kind of lead by example in terms of how they carry themselves on the field. And this is a guy, when the ball is in the air and it's 50-50, he is going to go get it. And we saw that on display in the game itself. 6'2", 190, good ball skills. He is a hands catcher as opposed to a guy who lets the ball get in to his body. And not what you would call like a burner in terms of stopwatch. Like, he's not going to run a 4.3, but is what I kind of call like an easy mover. Like, he's very smooth in and out of his cuts, his breaks as a route runner, and just as an additional high-quality, highly talented receiver in what arguably might be the best on-paper receiver class South Carolina's ever had. Certainly one of the best that they've had in quite some time, and is cousins to Alshon Jeffrey, which is a good...
it's a good lineage right there.
Very good lineage. And I would never compare a guy to Alshon, but just, the skill set, there are some similarities to how he plays the game.
Sure.
He is kind of a big-bodied kid. Alshon, I went back and looked. Alshon was listed at 213 in high school. It's about 6'3", 6'4", 213. So still not quite that wide-body guy that Alshon is, but 6'2", 190 already. And it is someone who knows how to kind of manipulate his body positioning and use it in space.
And anytime we get these commitments, and we'll get into the specifics of the whole wide receiver class in a second, you're always going to tout what these guys' abilities are. That doesn't always mean they're going to be able to come in and make an impact right away, but the belief is that he could be one of those guys that could come in and see the field very early. When you look at like what happened this past season with Mazeo Bennett, who immediately got on the field and was a big part of this passing offense throughout the entire season, how does he compare to someone like him that was able to come in and make a statement right away?
Yeah, I would say pretty different in terms of skill set. Mazeo, more of a slot guy. Mazeo, an elite route runner. They both have good hands. Obviously, Donovan a good bit bigger than Mazeo. And so a lot of people, so I've been obviously filling in for Chris the last couple of days. We have our Ask Chris thread, which is now our Ask Wes thread for the rest of this week. And one of the questions I've gotten the most is, hey, which of these wide receivers are going to play? Which of these wide receivers, how do they compare? And my answer has kind of been like, look, guys, I don't know if we can accurately say that yet, because I think individually all of them could play. in 2025 individually. Now, will all of them play in 2025 and make an impact? No, just by the numbers, that's not going to be possible.
Sure.
I think the cream will rise to the top. I'll be curious to see. So all these guys except for Murph will go through spring practice.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to learn a lot more in spring ball about what the early, I don't want to say depth chart, but what sort of the early pecking order is going to be among this group. With Murph, the question with him, and you can see the way he carries himself, there is a maturity here, even as a guy who is an early enrollee. How quickly, though, will he pick things up? How quickly will he kind of get acclimated to SEC football, to just college football in general, as a summer guy, no spring ball, and someone who's not going through their senior year? Your senior year is another full opportunity for physical development, technical development as a wide receiver, and just being, a year older. So I think with Murph, you love the skill set. Like, you love the ability, you love the mindset. The real question with him is just how quickly can he be ready? How quickly can he get ready? But you go through this list, man. I mean, all these guys individually bring something to the table. It's just going to be a fascinating study to see who emerges first as sort of the cream rises to the top.
And look, we've lofted a lot of praise, and rightfully so, Mike Furry for what he's done with this wide receiver room this year, particularly looking at a guy like Nick Harver and his development. He played a very solid game the other night in the Citrus Bowl as well. But for his first full recruiting cycle to pull in this level of wide receiver talent, a lot of those guys from in-state, again, another feather in the cap and what's been a great year for Mike Furry here at Carolina.
Well, he basically batted 1,000 on the in-state wide receivers, got what you would say would be the top two guys for 2025 in Malik Clark and Jaden Sellers, then got what were the top two local guys for 2026, but they reclassed to 2025. And then on top of it, goes into North Carolina and gets Brian Rowe, who is a very intriguing prospect in that he's small. If this guy was not as small as he is, I think he would have had 50 offers. Like, he is an elite athlete. So you add him, then you add in Lex Cyrus, who you go up and basically steal from Penn State's backyard. Mm-hmm. Penn State wanted him. Like, this was not a matter of Carolina just recruiting a guy they didn't want. Penn State wanted him. So Fury has proved very quickly an ability to build relationships with guys. That's what recruiting is about. Recruiting is relationships. Recruiting is, are you willing to work? And not all guys, as crazy as it sounds, not all guys are willing to work as hard at recruiting as they need to be successful. So this gives you a great foundation, I think is the best way to say it, for the future of that receiver room. Remember when Shane Beamer hired Fury, or maybe actually when he hired your boy that left for
James
Georgia.
Coley.
Yeah, Coley, who was here for a month.
That was a fun 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, exciting stuff there. He said, doesn't matter which guy he was talking about, point remains. He said, I want to increase the high school recruiting at this position. So I still think, they'll take a portal guy or two potentially at that position if they can get the right guy. But I mean, we're like I said, we're gonna learn a lot in the spring. I'm very intrigued to see who we start to hear buzz about among this group once spring ball gets started.
It's going to be excited to see what this team looks like, and plenty of reason to be excited about this 2025 class. Didn't get a chance to dive into this yesterday because we were breaking down all things Citrus Bowl, but we've now got 2 rounds of the college ball playoffs in the books and semifinals coming up next week. We'll give our thoughts on that coming up next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game.
them to stop the run, continue to force takeaways, saying if they beat us throwing the ball, so be it. He stressed their edge rushers playing relentless, wants them to continue their intensity.
Jaden Harrison bringing back the kickoff. He brought 2 back for touchdowns last year when he played for the Thundering Herd of Marshall, and he has one for Notre Dame.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. That's called last night in the All-State Sugar Bowl. Sean McDonough and Molly McGrath at the beginning of that with the call of Jaden Harrison's touchdown on the kickoff to start the second half of the Sugar Bowl as Notre Dame would go on to win 23-10 over Georgia to end the second round of the college football playoff. All the lower seeds advancing, no conference champions still standing as we move on to the semifinals next week.
Yeah, and that's a weird sentence. At the same time, I feel like the best, like, these were not surprises either, though.
No. If Arizona State had beaten Texas, that would have been surprising. Even though Arizona State outplayed them for pretty much that entire game, that would have been a surprise. Nobody's shocked that Penn State beat Boise State. You know, credit to them for winning the Mountain West, but Penn State was the better team. Notre Dame physically manhandled Georgia for 4 quarters
They're
last
the better
night.
team.
Better team. And Ohio State just bludgeoned Oregon in that game.
That was probably not that anybody watching what Ohio State did the week before. I don't think anybody was shocked to see Ohio State win the game. I think it was somewhat shocking to just see what dominant fashion they did it in. And it was one of those games where they threw 3 haymakers early, and then it was just like, all right, let's not screw this up. Like, you knew Oregon was going to counterpunch to an extent, but they had such a big lead. You were just like, I don't know if there's time for them to come back.
Ohio State had 4 touchdown drives in the first half. The average number of plays per drive, 2.25. They just immediately just went for the neck every single time.
And I think Chip Kelly, obviously the players are making plays, but Chip Kelly has had some fantastic game plans to start on script with that extra time. You give Chip Kelly that extra time, against Tennessee, which was a really good defense coming in. Oregon, good defense coming in too. But the game plans have been fantastic. And, I think he's really put a lot of confidence in his players, and they've really just fed off of that. And I think we're going to look back when Ohio State, if they win this thing, and yeah, all the transfer portal additions have been huge, obviously, in what they've done, but also going out and getting a sitting head coach with as much just ability and as much knowledge as Chip Kelly to come in and be your OC and just be able to say, look, you handle the offense. I'm giving you complete control, all the keys. Then that has proved huge. And I was talking to a Michigan buddy of mine yesterday. I mean, they awakened Ohio State. Like this is a completely different team than the one we saw at the end of the year.
Let's get a quick cut in here from Ryan Day. Cut number 14 here, Dave. Here's him after the Rose Bowl being asked if the Michigan loss did fuel this run they've had in the college football playoff so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to say something like that. But I know that, you're a sum of your experiences. And this team has had great wins this season. It's had some tough losses. And, we have learned from those. And you got to grow and you got to build and you got to make sure you're, focusing on your strengths and making sure that, you understand what your weaknesses are. And I think that's a big part of it. But ultimately, it comes down to our guys. And I just keep going back to that because these guys are resilient. And, we're at a place where, you can hear a lot of noise, but they didn't do that. And I'm very, very proud of our staff. I'm very, very proud of our players, but we're far from done.
And look, I wrote off Ohio State after that loss. I thought, especially the way that Ryan Day reacted to that game, I thought he was broken. I thought that program was broken for the rest of this year, and they've gone out and proved me and a lot of people wrong. And I kind of equate it to what we have here with Dawn Staley's team, which is legitimately one of the most talented rosters in women's basketball in the entire country. Ohio State, without a doubt, talked about it all offseason, has one of the, if not the most talented and most expensive rosters in college football. And for a lot of the season, didn't have to play up to that highest standard because a lot of the opponents they played just couldn't match up with them. They lost the Oregon game, but that wasn't, a humbling loss because that was more screwy at the end of the game more than anything else and just lost on a weird circumstance. Losing to Michigan humbled them because they had to look themselves in the mirror and say, we're better than this. There's no reason we should have lost this game. There's no reason we should have even been in a dogfight in the fourth quarter. And they've gone out and played flawlessly since then. Sometimes you need to be reminded of who you are and get brought back down to earth a little bit to play your best, much like Dawn Staley's crew's done since losing to UCLA a couple weeks ago, have played their best basketball since. And Ohio State doing the same thing in football.
I think Ohio State has played a more aggressive brand, too. Like, I think they were... Like philosophically, it feels like watching them that they played a little bit more of a let's just not mess this up because we're so talented as opposed to a let's take the fight to our opponent and just hammer them early on. And there's been a double down on let's get the ball to Jeremiah Smith. Let's make teams prove they can cover him. When you combine his just incredible ability. Reminds me of Julio Jones.
Mm-hmm.
But you combine that with the job they've done scheming him into one-on-one situations. And one-on-one doesn't always just mean, hey, it's man coverage and it's one-on-one. What are you doing as a defense? It's easy to sit at home and be like, well, how did you get him in one-on-one situation? Well, shifts, motions, stuff like that, pre-snap, you can create one-on-one scenarios where it may be a zone coverage, but because of the route combinations you're running, it puts him in a one-on-one situation with a particular defender in that zone. And I think that's what Chip Kelly has done a fantastic job of doing, is making opponents not be able to just say, oh, we're just going to double that guy or we're going to put our safety over the top of him. They're moving around. They're getting him the ball, underneath on motions where you're just flipping the ball. You're just saying, look, this is our best player. And we've got some great players, but on offense, this guy is potential number one overall pick at wide receiver.
Well, and you have another threat on the other side with Emeka Egbuka as well, who's probably the second best wide receiver in all of college football this year. And those two guys are threats on both sides of the field. So when you focus in on Jeremiah Smith, you're opening up him to be successful. And when you're focusing on him, guess what? Jeremiah Smith's running free. So they have so many weapons, which is what, again, disappointed a lot of people with that loss to Michigan, because how do you have this talented of a roster not utilizing them in the right way to blow out a team like that? And again, it woke them up. They didn't let Tennessee even get off the bus before they were up 21-0. They're up 34-0 on Ohio State, before you could blink in that game. And again, I don't think it's going to be any different taking on Texas next week, especially a Texas team that's not played their best football as of late. And I don't know, maybe beating Arizona State will wake them up. But if Ohio State keeps playing at this level, nobody's going to beat them, and they're going to be the national champion in 17 days.
Well, it certainly feels like now Texas will have to rise to the occasion of what Ohio State is. And we've seen Ohio State get kicked, get knocked down. Now they've risen to where they were probably the standard at this point. Texas has enough talent to where they can beat Ohio State. But now it sort of switches and you're going, it's going to take a Herculean effort from Texas. Like, they're going to have to play maybe their best game of the year, and they've just been such a weird team. They even talked about it on the broadcast, how a lot of their games have had this kind of flow where they play pretty well early, and you see flashes of, hey, this could be a dominant team.
We thought they were going to blow out Arizona after 5 minutes on Wednesday.
We thought they were going to blow out Clemson, and they let Clemson sort of get back in it. Texas A&M, that game, A&M hung around.
Arkansas game.
Yeah, teams just, Vandy hung around against them. Teams hang around even though Texas looks like the far superior team, and then they have these drives late where they just put the game away. The only difference was Arizona State punched back after what we thought was kind of that put-away drive. So that's we got plenty of time to talk about that matchup, but that's going to be a fantastic game. Right now, though, you'd have to say Ohio State and Notre Dame are your two favorites to play each other in the title game.
That's why I'm kind of leaning as of right now. Men's basketball in action, starting conference play tomorrow, taking on Mississippi State, 2 o'clock tip. Pregame coverage starting at 1:30 here on the game. Same thing for the women on Sunday. Same tip time, same pregame coverage right here on the game, taking on Mississippi State as well. Did you see the Gator Bowl last night with Ole Miss and Duke?
I saw parts.
You saw parts. I think you may have saw one particular part that I think we need to address coming up next. So we'll do that. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Friday on the game.
former walk-on quarterback at Memphis. Juice is loose. Antoine Wells into the end zone for the touchdown. 32 yards.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler and Wes along with you on your Friday. That was last night, Gator Bowl down there in Jacksonville as Ole Miss had their way with Duke Staley's 52-20 final score. That was Juice Wells, the former South Carolina wide receiver, scooting in for a 32-yard score. And you can't see it, obviously, because that's audio. But
former Gamecock Central Takeover Hour guest.
Former Gamecock
and Garnet
Central
Trust
Takeover
Hour guest.
Friend of Firehouse Subs, the whole 9 yards. Somebody we've had in studio here before. After scoring the touchdown, his celebration in a lot of people's minds was alluding to Shane Beamer having to be held back by his staff on Tuesday, going after Brett Bielema. And the funny thing was, when he does this, the referee in the end zone reacts to it like he's actually trying to go fight someone and like kind of like does that panic, like scamper towards him. But it's clear what he's trying to do in mocking his former head coach to those of us that know what's going on.
Yeah, so that was my first question. Because Tyler, you're younger than I am, man, but we're all getting older here.
Sure.
I was like, all right, am I just missing something here? You know, anytime there's like a trend or there's something your brain hasn't seen before, I'm like, is there any way this is anything else? And I'm an idiot. And I'm looking online, and eventually the worst thing about social media and the best thing about social media is usually the worst. But if you're wrong about something, somebody's going to correct you.
Sure.
And nobody came in and said, guys, you're idiots. This is actually blah, 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 blah. What else could this be but a mocking of shit? Which, here's the thing I didn't get. I didn't realize there was bad blood.
I didn't either. I mean, from what we understood, he got offered a lot to go to Miss, chose to go there. And yes, there was the fake out of saying he was coming back, and then 10 days later he's going to Ole Miss. But from all indications, we didn't think there was
there wasn't any bad blood on his side. I feel like
from what we know,
other than did he take issue with that press conference comment from Shane Beamer?
Ooh,
that
it's a good point.
We had a guy leave who thought we didn't have a quarterback next year. That wasn't even a shot at Juice. It was just more like.
But from his side, I could see how he would take that.
That's because sure. I mean, not to just throw rumors out on the radio, but there's a pretty heavy rumor that Juice Wells wanted to come back to South Carolina during the offseason. So, I mean, I wouldn't say there was any hardcore bad blood at the time when it first happened if Juice wanted allegedly to come back. So, I don't know. Or was this more just in fun?
Maybe, because I feel like in the fact that he's mocking, in a sense, the Beamer action of going after Bielema, if he would have done the T-bar instead, which when I first, because I didn't see this happen live, I saw people making a fuss about it, and I went and checked, and I thought that's what he was going to do. I thought he was going to do the T-bar in the end zone, which that to me would have been a more like very direct shot. So, like, I don't know if doing the fake going after someone is almost a tongue-in-cheek way of, you know, giving his former coach praise. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great in life and in sports. You know, sometimes it can be like in support of, and sometimes it can be like I'm straight up mocking the guy. So what? And I don't know how to interpret.
Yeah, I don't believe he spoke after the game. We never got any follow up on this, and that was his last, play as a college football, or last touchdown as a college football player. His only reception of the game is now he's going to, go off to the NFL. But it's a good question. Was that honoring your former coach, or was it making fun of him?
And if it was making fun of him, was it in jest, or was it like I feel like there's, you know, I mean, me and my buddies make fun of each other all the time.
Sure, you can be like, man, Coach Beamer's my dog, and what he did was funny. I'm going to do the same thing. Like, that's a good question.
Like, there's very much different levels to how you make fun of someone.
Well, the immediate reaction was making fun of someone in the negative.
That it was a troll job.
That was a troll job. And again, this happened just a couple days ago. And again, I feel like the T-bar would have been more of a disrespectful way to do this, but kind of faking the outrage thing could go either way, I guess.
And it left just enough sort of room for interpretation too. If he'd have had his teammate T-bar him, and then it would have been quite obvious.
Yes.
Like, it was already obvious, but it would have confirmed. This is a recreation of what we saw.
College football.
And then you saw Kiffin.
Kiffin was feeling himself last night, man.
He retweeted the video just with like a smiling emoji. So not that you're surprised.
Kiffin was having a good time in Jacksonville last night, calling out Diego Pavia, doing that the whole 9 yards. That'll do it for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show, myself, Terry Ford, up next here on The Game.